Hello and welcome to Are You Ready for the Future? I'm your host, Joe Santana. In this program, we talk with members of the CDO Power Circle about what they're doing in their DEI practices to address the challenges and opportunities of the new normal and what they're doing to future-proof their practices and their companies. The program aims to provide DEI leaders with ideas, insights, and inspiration from our members who are thought leaders. But before we go to our discussion with our guests in this session, let's first listen to a quick word about our sponsors. I'll see you on the other side. The future. It sounds like we're talking about tomorrow, but the future of DEI is here now. It runs at a relentless fast pace, and tomorrow will be even faster than today. Let's face it, CDOs can't keep up with all of it, especially not applying the same old pre-2019 practices. That's why you need yourself and everyone in your extended DEI team to gear up and get ready to operate like a fast-running, well-oiled machine. And that's why the CDO Power Circle delivers enriching programs to develop DEI leaders at every level of your organization, from the CDO and Office of DEI members through executive sponsors for your communities to your resource group leaders. We've got you covered. Here are just a few of the benefits your membership buys you. Access to our Sharpen the Axe sessions that give top DEI strategists cutting-edge skills and techniques that they can quickly put to use. Seats for you and all your executive sponsors and all your ERG leads in the ERG Power Talk discussions with today's top thought leaders. Unlimited seats for all the members of your extended DEI team to our Summer Virtual Academy. Monthly exclusive resource letters with timely articles and videos. And seats at the annual DEI Future Foresight Summit, where you get a glimpse at what next year and those that follow will bring, so that you can get ahead of the curve in planning for tomorrow. We also invest part of your membership fee in services that give back to the DEI community while providing you and your company with powerful and significant branding. For example, our weekly newsletter that curates signals from the new normal and the future, our ERG Power Talk podcast that provides hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of free development and insight to ERG leaders across the globe, and our Are You Ready for the Future series, where we provide tips to other DEI leaders to help them get ready for the new normal and future-proof their practices. The CDO Power Circle, here for you because the future is right now. Welcome, everybody. We've got our spotlight guest, a CDO Power Circle member, Sheryl Battles. She's Vice President, Global Diversity, Inclusion, and Engagement at Pitney Bowes. Sheryl and I go back quite a number of years now, and I think you're going to find her insights as refreshing and as enlightening as I always do. Sheryl, thanks for joining us today. I appreciate having you here.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So for those of you who don't know Sheryl, I think it might be a good start to begin with a little bit about what Pitney Bowes does. So can you give us a little bit about the background, what your organization does, the scale at which it does it, and so forth?
Sure. We are over 100 years young, a company that's a global shipping and mailing company that really provides technology, logistics, and financial services to more than 90% of the Fortune 500 and over 750,000 small and medium-sized businesses, and really across all sectors. We like to talk about, we take the complexity, if you will, out of sending parcels and mail to really enable our clients to focus on and do what they do best. 11,000 employees, actually closer to 12,000 employees globally. Our annual revenues are around 3.7 billion. Often I like to think of us as a big, small company.
So let me ask you this, for an organization like yours, clearly you're a B2B organization, right? You're working with institutions. So why is DEI so critical to the success of your business? Because I know what the arguments are for businesses that sell to consumers or businesses that sell to the government. But a lot of times businesses that are in the B2B space feel like, well, it doesn't really affect us that much. But you and your organization, you differ on that. You believe that it's critical to your success. Why is that?
It's a great question, Joe, but we believe it's really fundamental to who we are. And I know a lot of people are fond of saying that for their different organizations, but it really is authentic to us. We don't believe that no organization exists in a vacuum. And so you can't deliver true value to the markets you're trying to serve without appropriately understanding and reflecting those markets throughout all of your organization, whether the talent you employ, the communities that you operate in and support, the suppliers that you use to deliver the products and services that you do, the policymakers and influencers that really impact your ability in the market. The bottom line is the world is diverse, and we've got to be diverse in order to really, truly deliver relevant innovation and to interact in a way that is an informed understanding versus not. I say it's fundamental to who we are because our history really goes back to the 1940s. So we started in the 1940s with this need to find the talent to do some mission critical work. Our CEO, Walter Wheeler, was appointed by President Roosevelt to be on the War Production Board, which literally was a board, drawing on your past experience, Joe, that coordinated producing and manufacturing all of the things needed to supply the Allied war effort. And he took a leave of absence from the company to do it and was in Washington, D.C., but here in Connecticut, we're not that far from D.C. So he'd come back to the company on the weekends and leave notes for everyone on what was on his mind. One of the things they were facing, obviously, was there was a need for ramped up production capacity. Not only ramped up, but really producing many different things than these manufacturers had done previously, and to do it at an accelerated pace and be high quality. And while you had this great pressure then on this manufacturing capacity, you also had 30% of the men 16 and older who were already involved in the war effort. So a decision was made that these war production boards would work with manufacturers to expand the workforce. And it was decided that they would actually go out, and that's what our CEO was on the front lines doing, talking to owners of manufacturing facilities and those who are operating them to get them to hire women, African Americans, and the disabled. And this is starting in 1942. And there was great scrutiny on this, quote, new workforce. And what did they see? They saw productivity. They saw commitment to quality. They saw willingness to work. They saw a motivated, engaged workforce. So our CEO wrote a note to our head of personnel and said, you know what? I want to make sure that there is nothing that either from a policy or practice that prohibits us from hiring talented people, irrespective of race or religion. Now, that doesn't sound like a big deal today, but this is in 1942-43 in segregated America. And we started a program from that called the Fair Employment Program. And this program was classic change management and, again, aimed at bringing in a more diverse workforce. And 20 years or so later, when the U.S. Congress was considering what we know today as the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In 1963, they reached out to our CEO and the Senate asked if he would come and testify in support of this bill and talk about our then 20-year-old Fair Employment Program. Because in that intervening 20 years, not only had we continued the program, we had actually started to speak out about the need to desegregate the U.S. workforce in order to be competitive on a global basis, that it was talent that we couldn't afford to miss out on. So the bottom line is we're very proud of the fact that our CEO actually testified before the Senate in support of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and what we know today as Title VII, equal employment opportunity for all. So when we say it's fundamentally who we are, that really is. So we talk about diversity being our reality and inclusion being our intentionality. And we are almost 50% people of color and 43% female. Our board of directors is 50% female with people of color on the board. So I will conclude this answer with a quote from our CEO, who wrote, "Our remarkable talent works in a culture of excellence with passion and a proven ability to innovate, to persevere, and to succeed. Our focus on being diverse and inclusive makes this all the stronger. This has been true for a while. We didn't strive to create a diverse team and board because it was trendy. We did it because we firmly believe that diversity makes us better, and inclusion is essential to drive engagement and deliver value to all our stakeholders. We have a diverse workforce, leadership team, and board, and we know we can and we must continue to do more."
That's an excellent story. I love that story. As you were going through it, I was thinking about the fact that it seems like your CEO and some of the people in your organization realize something early on that flips the question of what's the business case for diversity to what is the business case for a monolith? What is the business case for exclusion? What is the business case? And there is no business case for it, especially when you're looking at the fact that talent today is so precious in this particular time that we are in right now, and that there's a war for talent. When someone asks for a business case for diversity, especially in a B2B environment where the argument might be, we're not really selling to consumers or have to really reflect a particular market. It's a company to a company. But I think that this basically looks at it from the standpoint of there is no gain in being exclusionary. There is no gain in being non-equitable, as it were, and creating an environment that literally hamstrings your workforce by not including market of people, of potential resources and talent that's already out there and that can really enhance your company. So I love that. I think that very early on that flipped it from what is the business case for diversity and equity and inclusion to what is the business case for not doing this? There is no business case for not doing this. In fact, it can hurt you not to do this. So great answer. I love that. One of the things that came up while you were talking, I happened to glance over at the chat and I saw a quick comment about the fact that your title includes the word engagement. And the question was that intentional? And can you just a little bit about that? Because that's one of the things that came up, which I thought that's something we should explore a little bit as well.
Sure. Great question, because engagement, we believe 100% that inclusion drives engagement. So if you think about engagement as being all in for the team, you can't be all in for the team if you don't feel like you're on the team. So you have to start with inclusion and creating a culture in which everyone feels vested in the success of the organization because they feel that the organization is invested in their success, that their voice matters, that they have the opportunity to learn and grow, and that they can be authentically and wholly who they are in safety, and not just safety, but are actually valued for that perspective, right? No one gets to where they want to go through groupthink. So this concept that we talk about leveraging our differences to deliver superior results. And we think the inclusion piece is directly tied to engagement. So when we look at engagement, and we've talked about metrics a lot, Joe, and the world of metrics around D&I continues to evolve. But one of the ways we measure our diversity and inclusiveness is through our engagement surveys. And we have exceptionally high engagement scores. They've only increased through 2020 and beyond, at a time when some companies said, you know what, we're not going to measure engagement this year because we know everybody's consumed with the pandemic. We made the decision, no, we're going to go forward. It's a critical listening strategy for us in getting input from employees, because we, like every other business, have been going through a strategic transformation, and the best strategies in the world mean nothing if you don't have that engaged workforce to execute and sustain them. So engagement is something we really pay very close attention to, and it's a huge piece of my portfolio on a day-to-day basis, but it is directly linked from our perspective to my work in D&I.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's shift a little bit of our attention now to where we are now. You gave us a little bit of a history of your organization. And my question is, in terms of all the things that are going on, the things that have produced that new normal, as we call it these days, although I think the new normal just means that we're in a high disruption, quick changing environment that's moving at a faster pace than it was in the past. What are some of the things that you've done in your DEI practices today to address any new opportunities and or challenges raised by that new normal?
Yeah, we've been busy. I often chuckle. If you remember all the discussion right when the pandemic kind of came to the forefront here in the US, it was declared a pandemic in March of 2020. I remember March 13th, 2020 was when we made the decision to send everyone home, consistent with what was about to happen here in the state of Connecticut, for instance, where we are headquartered. But for the next quarter, March, April, May, right before George Floyd, there was all this discussion in the D&I community about what was going to happen with D&I. That when organizations in the world were focused on dealing with this global health crisis, would D&I be pushed to the side? At that time, I wrote a 2-pager and said, from my perspective, from where I sit, here are the implications of this global health crisis and how it ties into some big things coming down the pike in D&I. And while I didn't have a crystal ball, pretty much everything that I put on that in that briefing came to pass. And those were the kinds of things we started, most of which we were already working on, but those are the things where we really doubled down. So for instance, the strain on working caregivers, especially when you suddenly go from having somewhat separated, in many instances, a work and life, and it all collapses into one location. So now, and women are still doing the majority of the home management activities as well as the caregiving activities. So now you're the chief learning officer and the chief medical officer and the chief procurement officer, and on top of your day job. That was stressful. And we saw that by the fall of 2020, as you started seeing large numbers of women dropping out of the workforce in particular. So that strain on working caregivers was something that we knew we wanted to address, very consistent with who we are culturally. And so we started an inclusion network for caregivers called PB-CAN. And PB-CAN gives caregivers, all ages, all stages, all kinds of caregiving, the opportunity to come together, exchange best practices, get access to information and resources. There's a focus on some self-care. One of our first ERGs, formed in the late 1980s, was a work-life ERG. So coming totally full circle, in a pandemic, we said we need to support caregivers. Another thing that, again, something we were already working on, mental well-being. Certainly, it's part of the long tail effect, if you will, of the pandemic. You talked about, Joe, so eloquently, just the accelerated pace of change in virtually every aspect of life, if you will. What we're seeing are the results of that and the stress and the strain on everyone. From that, we talked about having a three-legged wholeness approach with physical health, fiscal health, and mental well-being. And so we, in the fall of 2019, pre-pandemic, we actually said, you know what, our mental wellness activities will also be part and parcel of our diversity and inclusion activities. And so I co-lead a committee along with our health and wellness people on mental well-being. And that started in the fall of 2019. So since then, we have, again, all kinds of resources. Right now, for instance, we've got a series going on emotional intelligence. And that's a multi-part series, the next of which is in September. We just had sessions last week, global sessions offered several times so everyone can participate, and we record them so you can get access on demand. But we've really double-clicked on mental wellness and how do we support that as part of also removing the stigma, if you will, and making it part of our inclusive culture so that it's okay not to be okay. We're not trying to equip employees to be therapists. We're trying to equip them to be aware, to be cognizant, and to think about and understand ways to support. So even to the extent as we were looking at our external mental wellness partner, I was on the team evaluating who are we going to go with, not only in terms of their general services, but also looking at the diversity of those companies, the diversity of their provider therapist network, their understanding on, say, the emotional tax on being different, and what kind of services are you offering to people of color, to whether it might be some generational stresses or whatever it might be. Mental well-being was another area where we've really doubled down in light of what we've been seeing the last couple of years.
Yeah, those two areas are really big. I think the first one that you talked about is one that I haven't heard of in a lot of organizations. Don't know if any of the people that are here are going to talk about what they're doing in their organizations in that space later. But I will tell you, it sounds really dynamic because that caregiver umbrella covers a lot of stuff. I mean, some people have the children that, as you mentioned before, some people were homeschooling their children while working, while doing all this other stuff. Some people have elderly parents. Some people have both. They're being pressured on both sides of that demand. I think that sounds like a really interesting concept that can be used in a lot of different ways in different organizations. We talked about the speed at which things are changing and moving. So what steps are you taking to future-proof your company via your DEI practice? What are some potential other things that you're looking at now that you're saying, hey, you know what? We've got to track that and prepare for that because that's coming soon to a neighborhood near us.
So true. In talking about this conversation we're going to have today, Joe and I, who are both Trekkies, started talking about the time-space continuum, if you will. And I said, Joe, what it really feels like in many ways, the now and the future are blurred. And again, I think it goes back to what Joe said before, where we are now and what's coming at us are coming towards each other at such a tremendous speed in terms of the accelerated pace of change that it really has never been more true than now, that the future is now. And something Joe recently wrote, it's one of my favorite quotes about the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. And what this period, these last couple of years has done is it revealed the pockets of the future that were evident in our now. So when you think about everything like this disaggregation of work, task, and time and place, that was already here. Our workforce, for example, 35% of our eligible workforce was already working remotely or flexibly pre-pandemic. That was already happening. What the pandemic and the whole economy and the shifts we've seen since then have done, it just means that it's happening at a broader scale. And it means that it is evolving at a faster pace. But it was here. So when I think about the future, I tend to bucket it into it's diverse, it's dispersed, and it's digital, right? So we know the demographics that support the truth that diversity really is the reality and not the anomaly. And especially from a generational perspective, when you think about lower birth rates and larger cohort of aging in some of the Western civilizations, if you will, Western economies. And then when you look at the India, China, continent of Africa, all higher birth rates, younger growing populations in the workforce, it has some really interesting implications. Part of which we're seeing in this ferocious war for talent, where there are these high numbers of positions that aren't being filled. There's a high number of people who are moving around. There's low unemployment. And so we've got some mismatch going on here relative to what had been a fairly reliable engine, if you will, in terms of supply and demand and the matching of the skills and the talent with the jobs and the ways in which you wanted to utilize that talent. So that's being really disruptive. So one of the things we are talking about and looking at ways to make more of a reality, but to put some supports around it, is what we call an all-generation workforce. So we want to provide opportunities for employees throughout all ages and stages of their life. And there have been times when there's been this great push on, oh, your more seasoned employees, don't let them be blockers. We got to get in all this fresh new talent and turn this over. maybe not so fast. And so people are looking at very different ways of how do you retain that more seasoned, more experienced workforce who in some cases are delaying retirement. How do you keep them engaged? How do you use them in different ways? How does that work in terms of transfer of knowledge and institutional understanding? How do you leverage, no matter what the age and stage, where someone is, and keep giving them more opportunity and keep giving them a way to continue adding value? So that's one of the areas that we're really taking a look at. How do we make that happen for all ages, if you will? The head of diversity for the city of Stamford, her title is head of IDEA and IDEA, inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. So this accessibility is creeping into kind of the newer areas of focus. Accessibility is not new. We know, again, greatly underutilized population in terms of the disabled. And we also know there's a rise in really looking and thinking about neurodiversity. So these are both areas in which, again, as the war for talent continues to intensify, untapped or relatively less tapped talent pools, where you want to start thinking about how you can incorporate more of this really good talent into how you think about what you need to get done in your organization. And then the whole flex hybrid environment opens up all kinds of avenues. That's one of the other things I do. I co-lead our group that's thinking about the future of work, if you will, and what does that really mean? And we have some great examples already of how a couple of our teams are recruiting from everywhere. And just on a call yesterday, and someone said, "Oh, Sheryl, you'd be so proud because we have found such good, diverse candidates that we really are changing the composition of some of these teams by the fact that we broaden where we're recruiting from." The flip side of that is we always say to everyone, that's great. We want you to do that. We also need to be very careful that you don't create these pockets or silos where all of your diversity is sitting remotely or dispersed, but you still have larger teams that are not as diverse. That would not be what you want to happen. And so we're keeping a real eye on that, but we've definitely heard of that being true in some other sectors where it's, oh yeah, I can recruit all this diverse talent from here and here, but sitting over here, it's still not as inclusive or diverse as you'd like it to be.
Yeah, that's great. All that stuff that you're doing. And I'm very happy that you liked and you remembered that quote, because I think that that's really an important factor in understanding how to deal with the future, is that you can look and see signals of things that are happening all around us if you know where to look, and you can build on those. And clearly you guys have been looking at signals and you've seen some pockets in some areas of opportunity. So I want to give people an opportunity to jump in and ask you their own questions directly. So if like a 30-second, 45-second piece of final advice, what would your advice be to people who are listening to this? What is it that you would say, this is what you need to do to future-proof your organization?
It's really pretty simplistic. People are everything. Even as we sit here with an engineer from Google concerned that their AI has gone sentient. I get that. There's high irony there. But people really are everything. And diversity and inclusion and equity, et cetera, cannot be disconnected from who you are fundamentally, where you're going, and how you create value. So in other words, it's got to stay aligned with your overall values, strategy, and purpose of your organization or your entity, because that's where its sustainability lies. And you future-proof by thinking of it that holistically, that strategically, as integral to who you are, as opposed to incremental to who you'd like to be.
I love that. Fantastic. Sheryl, thanks again for joining us today for this session of Are You Ready for the Future?
You're very welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe so that you can watch all of the discussions with our insightful guests. Again, I'm your host, Joe Santana. Thank you for tuning in.